Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Playing to Win Practitioners Insight. I am Tiffani Bova, and
I'm Roger Martin. Happy to be here too, Tiffani.
yeah, we're just thrilled to get into the third of this video series. Today is going to be all about strategy versus planning. But if you know anything about me, I always like to anchor in the thought. So executive boards, leaders always talk about strategic planning. They sort of bunch those two things together. Like, we're going to go to an offsite. We're going to do strategic planning. Like, let's sit down. We're going to do strategic planning. But I learned many, many years ago, Roger doesn't actually like that combination of concepts between strategy versus planning. And so why not better to hear it straight from him on why he doesn't and why it's important to actually be distinct between the two.
Yes.
Roger, over to you.
Sure enough. And of course, you've known me for a long time, Tiffani, and I've probably been on this vector for that whole time. And that is, I shouldn't mind strategic planning, and because it says the word strategy in it, and I like strategy. But what has happened, I believe, over time with it is that planning has ended up dominating strategy. And so when people talk about strategic planning or the artifact, a strategic plan, it's a plan that doesn't have much of any strategy in it, at least 80% and probably 90% or more of the time. And so what I've come to want to do is tease those apart and say, what is planning, right? And planning is a good thing, but it's not strategy. And so what is strategy as opposed to planning, so that people don't mush them together in a way that in some sense strategy gets lost?
Well, and I think that a lot of this has to do with, I'm just going to use myself as an example. Like, high performer, and then the reward of that is you go and become a manager, and then like you do well, and then you become a bigger manager, and then, okay, let's say you get to sort of the leadership layer.
Yes.
But along the way, no one sort of goes, okay, this is how you should really think about strategy, and this is how you really should think about planning. And here's maybe I don't want to call it a framework because then it sounds a little constricting, but here's some things you should think about when talking about strategy versus here's some things you should think about when talking about planning. And I feel like I was just ill-equipped to actually run a successful strategic planning meeting because of the subtle differences between the two, and also the skill sets you would need necessarily for either or of those. Fair?
Yeah, no, totally fair. And in fact, as with usual, Tiffani, you always get me thinking about stuff. I think you're right. I think as you go up through an organization, you're exposed a lot to planning, right? We have to do the annual budget and plan that, and we have to plan this product launch and whatever. And so probably, Tiffani, you can recall back from the days when you were rising through the organization that probably lots of times your boss said, Tiffani, I need a plan for this product launch. I need a plan for this customer initiative. So you probably did get exposed to lots and lots of planning along the way up. But maybe you were more likely, when you were more junior in the organization, just to be on the receiving end of anything strategy. So Tiffani, here's our strategic plan. You go do something with it, as opposed to Tiffani, come help me. Of course, as you rose to high heights in the organization, there's more of that. But I hadn't thought of it that way, which is that as people migrate through their career, they probably get to know a lot about planning without a lot about strategy.
Yeah, and it was a CEO of mine. It was like 2002, 2003, and this was probably the largest block of responsibility I had, like right then, and he said this to me. He said, "Look, when you're an individual contributor, you're thinking like today, like, did I do my tasks? Did I do what I'm supposed to do? Like, I'm thinking today. You might become a team lead, and then you might think today and maybe through the remainder of the week, right? And then you get a little higher and now maybe it's the month. You get a little higher, maybe it's the quarter. You get a little higher, right? It's maybe 2 quarters. You get even higher, it might be a year. And then you're at the tip of the spear on the executive team. And now you might be thinking longer than a year, right? Could be a 2 or 3 year plan that you're backing into now from a execution standpoint. Fair?
Yeah,
So,
I think
okay.
absolutely. And again, if you think about those times, Tiffani, when you were in planning mode, typically in the planning mode, you're coming up with initiatives. Here are the 5 initiatives we're going to carry out to do this. You did all marketing, customer stuff. This customer initiative, or what we're trying to do with customers. Here's the 5 things we're going to do. We're going to go talk to them, the agency, and we're going to get some creative, and etc. And so, sort of the currency of planning is initiatives, laying out a bunch of initiatives that hopefully will accomplish something. The currency of strategy is choices. And rather than being kind of a list of initiatives, it's what I call an integrated set of choices. There's a bunch of choices that have to fit together and reinforce each other. And those choices need to compel your customer to take the action you want. So rather than just being kind of a list of sensible things to do, which a plan tends to be, like if a plan looks any good, it's because none of the items on that plan seem silly. They're all sensible. But in a strategy, the question is not, are these sensible things? It's together, are they truly compelling? Will they cause the customer, when he or she is reaching into their pockets and pulling out some cash, are they going to give it to you for your offering, or are they going to give it to one of your competitors for theirs? And so it's a bit of a higher bar. It's rather than, are these sensible things that a sensible person would do, versus are these a set of compelling things when taken together?
Yeah, and I going back to that example of, when you're thinking about it daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and then sort of, multiple years, that's where I really felt I was kind of ill-equipped on the strategy side, because I had been so like, okay, here's the 10 things I need to do to get this result.
Yeah.
But the result I was chasing was set at the strategy level, right? We want to grow into this market, or we want to launch a new product, or we want to, get this partnership. And then I go, okay, that's the goal, right? Here's how I back into that goal by this set of activities. But now, as I've moved on to my career, like clients would come or customers would come and they'd be like, okay, we are trying to get, like, they know where they want to go, but then they don't know even maybe the decisions they need to make to get there before they even then make the plan on the tactics they have to execute on. Yep. Right. And so they're way off on multiple things.
Yep. And I don't know, I'm interested to know this, Tiffani. I haven't asked you this before, but on those many times when your boss came to you and said, okay, this is the thing we need to get done, and you dutifully go off and figure out the 10 things and what order and all of that. But what you find out as you do it, and maybe you even had an inkling from minute one, that what he or she told you to do was a dumb idea, i.e., it wasn't strategically sound. So even though you did all those 10 things, the results weren't what anybody hoped for. Not because the 10 things were a bad idea. It was their strategy was a bad idea.
Yeah. Well, I think that comes, I mean, it's a great question, but I think that comes with, to use our friend Amy Edmondson's term, right? The psychological safety of being able to just say to your boss, that's a really bad idea, and here's why. And I think that comes with confidence in your ability to understand, to be able to defend it's a bad idea and why, right? And then not just it's a bad idea and why, but it's a bad idea and why, but here's what I think we can do, knowing what I know, because most of the time when you get higher in the organization, unfortunately, if you work for larger companies, you get further and further away from the customer. And so you don't have that day to day where you can go, let me tell you why that's probably not a great idea. Or I like that with a little twist. And here's why, because this is what we're hearing. This is what we tried. This is what's worked. And they may not have one of your favorite words, and mine as well, the right context to make that strategic decision. And that goes back to one of our previous conversations. If you didn't catch one of the first two, go back and catch that, because I think that really gets us to this conversation. And I would say that's it. But understanding the full scope of the interdependencies is a skill that you have to learn how to master. Otherwise, you just can't you can't push back enough with enough insight and clout and confidence to be able to say, I get what we're trying to do, but is that really the right decision? Or maybe it looks like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I think of it like I think of often things quite visually, and in some sense, the picture of strategy is much different than the picture of planning. Yes. Which is the graphic at the start of the article. So as you can see, a strategy, as we've talked about before, are these 5 choices, but kind of the key thing about them is that they all have to fit together and reinforce. That's why you've got arrows going down and arrows going back up. Your where to play choice and your how to win choice have to fit together. Your capabilities have to be supportive of the how to win choice. It has to be consistent with your winning aspirations. So the picture there is different. The planning picture is sort of, there's some overarching vision or mission or something, and then there's a bunch of initiatives, often lots and lots of initiatives in the plan. Like that's why planning documents tend to be very long, right? Because they'll go through each of the initiatives. We're going to build this factory, and we're going to hire this many salespeople, and we're going to do this thing. All of those things. But because they're not exactly what you said, Tiffani, because they're not necessarily well integrated and interconnected, they just may not produce. In fact, they often do not produce what's desired. And people often say, gosh, we worked so hard, we planned so much, we were really thorough. But the being sort of thorough about a plan does not necessarily correlate with it being successful. Strategy is much more of an act of creating a story. I like to think of it as creating a story. We want to try to accomplish this in this space and win this way with these capabilities and management systems that we're bringing to bear on it. It's a story that all fits together. And if you pulled out one piece of that story, the whole thing would collapse. Yeah. Whereas if you pulled out one of the 15 initiatives, it probably wouldn't make that big a difference. And so I just think, in some sense, in my head, I visualize them as being very different things.
Well, there was a big push from a company I used to work at many years ago that really wanted to be able to help executives, people do strategy on a page, right? And kind of less is more, and how do you do that, and what's the approach, and what can you learn? And going back to that CEO, my boss back in the early 2000s, who said that whole cadence of you have a longer view the higher you move up in the organization. We had an exercise on it. We had a strategy on a page. And then from that, each of the aspects of that had sort of this offshoot that was then within that. Here are the top 3 things that are required for that to happen in order to play a part in the winning aspiration, or in that we didn't have a Rogers framework at the time, but where to play and how to win and what capabilities. And there were different words, and I think everybody's got some flavor of this. But you have to have the things that sort of tie back. And that's to your point. That's why planning documents are so big, because it is the whole structure of that. So let me ask you this, because who's best to manage this? Yeah, go ahead.
Before we go into that, I just want to, because you make such a good point, I just want to follow up on it, Tiffani, which is you are illustrating in what you said why strategy and planning are complements, not substitutes. So I think my beef is that people substitute planning for strategy, but what you said is, in fact, you said they're complements. In essence, you said after you've done the thing on the left, the picture on the left, you've got to then figure out all the ways, all the things you've got to do. So if they do it the way you described, Tiffani, I think you're going to get a good result, because you treated it, I think, properly as a complement, not a substitute.
And where we fell down was we fell down on who managed that document.
Yes.
Who owned the sort of, because it becomes very interdependent. I mean, if any of you have ever worked with a Microsoft, project, you will understand interdependencies. But it's like, if one thing doesn't get done, it ripples to the fact that I needed that to get done before I could start doing this. And then downstream, it just has, and all of a sudden, everything pushes into this delay status or late status. And so what we didn't have was we didn't have the muscle to manage that from a, I'm using the project in air quotes, right? Like we didn't have the muscle to manage it from, we all agreed on the strategy, right? Then we all agreed on the tactics, we called it something else, but the plan, right? And the plan, by the way, was also on a 1 page, and then behind it was a lot of stuff. But then in 2 pages, we could sit in our leadership meeting and we could just go one by one and be like, how's the strategy going? Any adjustments? And then what in the plan is delayed or delaying, or we learned we can't do that, or something happens that then has implications to, going back to what we were just saying, maybe that wasn't the right strategic decision because we can't overcome whatever it is that's getting us stuck over here.
Yes. Makes
right.
sense. Yep.
And so I don't know if you've ever seen, in saying that, like, I don't want people listening to this, they're like, oh my gosh, right. We need somebody who understands strategy and planning, and then we need someone to manage it and track it. And when you're working with clients, what is the mechanism you advise them to actually use to track through this, right? So if we go back to, let me pull it back up again. If we go back to the image, right? And again, if you didn't listen to the first two, we talked about that box on the left, but on the box on the right, on the planning side, just managing this in a way that allows for adjustments, changes, course correction, whatever verbiage you want to use. What's the right way to do that?
Well, a couple things. What I think that often happens, Tiffani, that causes this to not work is that the strategy is stated at too abstract a level. So it's sort of like, well, customers should be totally happy and sort of like, or we should have very satisfied customers, as opposed to saying, our strategy assumes customers like the following 3 things, and we're going to deliver 2 of them better than anybody else, and the 3rd one as well as others. And here's what the first thing means, here's what the second thing means, here's what the third thing means, so that you're specific enough on what you're actually trying to accomplish. In that case, how exactly you're going to win with customers. I think if you're not specific on those things, what you've got to be doing is saying to the next level, not you must execute my strategy. It's your strategic job now to take what I've said and make the next level of choices. Because it's hard, it really is sort of hard to say, when does choice making stop? Right? Like I say strategy is choice, right? That me, that's my mantra. Strategy is choice. But when you've made those choices, right? When the CEO of Procter & Gamble says, we're going to win in the following 6 sectors, including beauty care. Alexandra Keith, the wonderful head of beauty care, she can't just say, oh no, that's crystal clear now. I know exactly what to do in beauty care. No, she's got to say, okay, the CEO has said we're going to win on branding and R&D and innovation and go-to-market scale, and one of the sectors is going to be beauty care. She's got to say, well, is that going to be skincare, shampoos, conditioners, antiperspirants, and deodorants? Is it going to be fine fragrances, or is it going to be hair colorants or not? She's got a whole bunch of where to play, how to win choices. So I think what is the most important thing to do is to recognize that choices still have to be made. And for the people having made the strategy is to say to the next level, you're going to have to make choices that are consistent with mine. And if you're wondering about the choices we've made at our level, at this higher level, come ask. And if you're wondering about your choices, come ask. And it gets to be a dialogue between the levels on how are we making all the choices that are going to bring this to fruition. I think if you have that dialogue, Alexandra Keith can figure out what are the initiatives that she's got a plan for, and we'll have agreement with John Moeller, the CEO of Procter & Gamble.
So we've just gone through a lot. And I love these conversations, but we are almost out of time. And so, I'd love you to kind of wrap this up with your thoughts on how people can action some of the things we've talked about, and then I'll take us home. So, where do you think, listening to this, and we have a lot of, individual contributors that they are downhill, right? Someone sets the strategic plan, they toss it over the fence. I got to go, okay, I'm going to go execute on this, right? The practitioner versus the producer, or I guess the receiver, you use those terms, the receiver of the plan versus the one that is producing it. Let's lean in a little bit to the receiver.
Sure.
So you've now received it.
It would be to, one, be open and brave enough to ask questions so that you really understand the logic behind the strategy. I often think that receivers just say, I think this is what the boss meant, and so I'm going to go do it. And they don't really have it right what the boss really meant. So number one for that receiver would be ask enough questions so you know what the real intent is of the boss. And then even if the boss says go execute it, don't listen to that. Say, I got to make some real choices here. And I better start thinking about it in a similar way, how I can make an integrated set of choices in my domain to accomplish what the boss has asked me to accomplish. Don't say, because I'm lower level, I'm just going to put together a list of initiatives that don't integrate together, because even though that may feel good, the only way you're going to get positive action is if your choices are integrated and compel the results that you want. That would be my advice.
All right. My advice would be read Playing to Win. That would be my first advice. And the reason why I say that, it goes back to where I started this morning or this afternoon or wherever you are this evening, is that you move up and you don't necessarily have the tools. Yep. You don't know how to respond to action, to set, to push back. And I think that is something that all of us have to continue to work on. Like even today, like, someone says something to me and I'm like, okay, I have 4 choices. I always say, how would I answer in my 30s? Is very different than how I would answer to my 40s. Is very different than how I would answer in my 50s. And it's because I would be very knee jerk and I wouldn't have the thought together. And then I sort of had the thought together, but I didn't have anything to back it up. And then I had my thought together. I had enough to back it up. Now, how am I going to say it to compel action? And that becomes a skill that I think all of us have to continue to work on and hone in on. So if nothing else, I want you to hear from here that everybody faces the same thing. Even if you're looking at your bosses and your managers of a Fortune 500 company or a very small business, we all struggle with the same things. Setting strategy and planning and executing is hard. And no one ever said it was easy.
Well, and you got to keep learning. I was with a client for 2 days this week and facilitating them through some strategy. And I learned something new about strategy this week. I had an aha moment as I figured out they were struggling with something and I hadn't been explaining it clearly and well enough. So I'm supposed to be a strategy guru. I still I still have to learn. It's that kind of skill. It's a practice. Strategy is a practice, and you just have to keep practicing and practicing.
Well, I love that, because if you're still practicing, then it gives us hope for the rest of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Playing to Win Practitioners Insights. I'm Tiffani Bova and my wonderful co-host, Roger Martin. And I hope you enjoyed this show. Don't forget about the 2 previous. Don't forget about the one that's going to come in a few weeks. But thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. Roger?
Thank you for having me again, Tiffani.
All right. Thanks, everybody.